In 1610, a woman named María de Zozoya admitted to murdering 840 people. But here's the truth. She couldn't have possibly killed even one. And the device that forced her to confess to the impossible is the reason you're about to encounter the most mathematically engineered instrument of torment ever conceived. The echoes of screams rebound across cold stone. A woman dangles in the air, bound by ropes, her limbs quivering. Beneath her waits a wooden frame crowned with a metal point, shaped like a pyramid. Its tip is sharp enough to break skin, yet purposefully and precisely, dull enough to inflict something far more horrific than death. This is the Judas Cradle. And before this story is over, you will grasp 3 truths that will stay with you. First, the geometric craftsmanship that turned gravity into a weapon, forcing the victim's own weight to destroy them. Second, why those subjected to it remain alive for days, swallowed by agony, and why their survival was essential. And third, the confession that unintentionally revealed the fatal weakness within Europe's entire torture apparatus, transforming legal history permanently. But before we descend further into this nightmare, hit that subscribe button now, because the detail I'm revealing at the 8-minute point is the most unsettling piece of evidence I uncovered, and it will completely reshape the way you understand justice. To grasp how something so cruel could be allowed to exist, we must return to Spain in 1478, because the Judas Cradle wasn't the invention of deranged dungeon keepers. It was a product of administrators working in royal halls. Imagine it. The year is 1478, and the Catholic rulers Ferdinand and Isabella have just done something unheard of. They've established the Spanish Inquisition not as a disorderly mob, but as a structured machine of interrogation. They have clerks. They have forms. They have a complete system. And they also have a dilemma. Burning suspected heretics' works to execute them, yes, but it works too well. The victim dies within minutes, sometimes even quicker if smoke suffocates them. There's no opportunity for confession, no chance for names of accomplices, no prolonged warning for the public. So the Inquisition's designers, yes, actual designers, started innovating. They required a device that would keep the prisoner alive for days, stretching the window for confession point 2, deliver steadily increasing torment, while leaving no visible injuries that might shock the crowd. 3. Function on its own, powered entirely by the victim's own weight working against them. The outcome was a Judas Cradle, named after history's most notorious traitor, because this instrument forced every victim to betray someone, friends, kin, even themselves. And here's the part that twists the mind. Inquisition documents described it as merciful. Merciful, because when compared to death by flames, at least this gave you several extra days to prepare your soul. Within years, the device traveled from Spain into Italy, Germany, France, and further, not through fear, but through endorsement. Inquisitors wrote admiring letters about its reliability, its psychological force, the admissions it extracted. But what made it so powerful? 3 engineered details that turn it into the era's most feared tool. And I'm warning you now, the first one will make your skin crawl. Imagine you're an Inquisition engineer in 1480. Your assignment is to design pain that never stops. How do you accomplish that? You begin with geometry. The Judas Cradle's pyramidal point usually measured 4 to 6 inches in height, built from wood or metal, and fixed onto a reinforced stool or elevated frame. But here's what makes the design brilliant in the most horrifying possible way. The angle, the tip, wasn't razor sharp. A needle point would puncture too quickly, causing lethal damage within hours. Instead, evidence from the Directorium Inquisitorium, the Inquisition's actual procedural manual from 1376, describes a shape calculated to avoid the vital organs, yet sharp enough to focus constant, punishing pressure. The victim, typically stripped bare, was suspended above the point by ropes tied to their wrists. Then came the descent, slow and torturous, lowered inch by inch. Guards handled the rope system, easing the prisoner downward until the pyramid pressed into the anus, the vagina, or occasionally the base of the spine. The victim's own weight supplied the force. Roughly 100 to 150 pounds of relentless, unavoidable pressure concentrated onto an area no wider than a coin. But here's what the diagrams never reveal. Here's what I uncovered in medical writings from physicians of that time. The human body, exposed to this kind of strain, flips into survival mode. Muscles contract automatically, straining to lift you off the torment. Your legs tremble. Your core tightens. Every part of you struggles to pull upward. For the first hour, possibly two, adrenaline gives you strength. You can partially support yourself, easing the force. You feel like you still have some control. But eventually, and this is where the engineered precision becomes truly satanic, your strength drains away. Muscle fibers weaken. You cannot keep resisting. Gravity is patient. Gravity never quits. As your body gives in, you drop lower. The pressure rises. The pain magnifies. You try to tilt your weight to alleviate it, but all that does is speed up the tearing of flesh. The cradle shifts slightly beneath you, producing a swaying motion. Survivors wrote that the worst part wasn't even the penetration itself. It was the knowledge that sleep meant death. Because if you passed out, if exhaustion finally overtook you, your full weight would slam downward onto that point. So you battle sleep for hours and then for days. Guards often tied weights to the ankles or yanked the ropes to make the victim fall a few inches before stopping them. Psychological torment layered atop physical destruction. The fear of the drop became its own special, personal hell. And every part of this, every angle, every measurement, every pulley and rope was drafted, approved, and standardized throughout Europe. But the true horror wasn't the pain. The true horror was what happened after 3 days on the cradle. Something that drove victims to beg not for an end, but for something far more terrifying. Because the Judas Cradle wasn't designed to kill swiftly. It was engineered to kill inch by inch. And the biology behind that slow unraveling is pure nightmare fuel. Let me walk you through what the human body endures during days spent on the Judas Cradle. And I promise this will answer the question that's probably in your mind right now. Why didn't they simply die? Medical notes from a Bamberg, which trials of 1627 to 1632 documented this with chilling precision. These writers were not executioners. They were physicians compiling records for academic study, which makes it even worse. The progression unfolded like this. Hour 1 through 6, the shock phase. Your body surges with cortisol and adrenaline. Pain receptors fire relentlessly, but your mind begins to detach from the experience. Victims said it felt like they were watching their own torture from somewhere outside their bodies. Heart rate rockets to between 120 and 140 beats per minute. Breathing becomes rapid and shallow. Pressure begins ripping microscopic fibers of tissue, but nothing fatal occurs yet. Hour 6 to 24, the collapse. This is when muscle fatigue becomes absolute. Your full weight now settles onto the pyramid's point. Pressure concentrated on a tiny surface begins destroying deeper tissue. And here lies the key. The dull angle means the point grinds and crushes instead of puncturing straight through. Blood flow is restricted but not halted. Nerves are smashed and irritated, producing a form of pain physicians describe as total. Neither sharp nor stabbing. A crushing, burning torment that refuses to plateau because it keeps intensifying. And you're still alive, still conscious. Day 2 to 3. Infection takes hold. Now the device's true cruelty becomes obvious. The wounds created from constant pressure become open gateways for bacteria. Exposure to feces, to rough wood or oxidized metal, and to the victim's own bodily fluids pooling below. Infection blooms quickly. Sepsis spreads to the bloodstream. Fever climbs. Delirium comes and goes in waves. But here's the critical part. Sepsis takes 3 to 7 days to kill a healthy person. The inquisitors understood this. Their manuals referenced the timing. They weren't trying to kill prisoners on the cradle. They wanted a long, harvestable stretch of suffering to force confessions, accusations, names. But there was something else that broke victims faster than pain. Sleep loss. Picture yourself awake for 2 full days, tortured continuously while infection eats through your body. Your mind begins splitting apart. Hallucinations appear. You see shapes, hear phantom voices. Guards questioning you mix with memories, visions, nightmares. Eventually, prisoners admitted to anything, everything. Not because the agony alone broke them, though it certainly contributed, but because their minds literally lost the ability to separate reality from the fantasies imposed by interrogation. And here's the three-stage pattern physicians observed. Stage 1, resistance and denial. Victims insisted on their innocence, pleaded for mercy, prayed loudly. Stage 2, bargaining and partial admission. They confessed to minor misdeeds, offering the interrogator something, anything, to make the torture end. Stage 3, total psychological collapse. Victims agreed to anything suggested, even acts that were physically impossible. This brings us to a single woman whose Stage 3 confession was so wildly implausible, so elaborately impossible, that it inadvertently revealed a fatal flaw in Europe's entire torture apparatus. Don't scroll away, because María de Zozoya's story shows how one woman on the Judas Cradle changed European legal history, and not in the way you might think. Her ordeal began like thousands of others, a charge of witchcraft, an arrest, and a date with the pyramid. But what she confessed was beyond belief. It is 1610 in Logroño, Spain. María de Zozoya, a 52-year-old midwife, has been accused of witchcraft by a neighbor who claims Maria's evil eye ruined her crops. Standard Inquisition procedure follows: arrest, questioning, and, if no confession comes, escalation to torture. María is placed on the Judas Cradle on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, about 30 hours later, she begins speaking, and she does not stop for 6 continuous hours. The confession, preserved in the Logroño Inquisition archives, spans 47 pages. Here are just 3 translated lines. I confess to attending Sabbaths on 214 occasions over 12 years, where I murdered 840 children by mixing toad venom with their mother's milk. I flew to these gatherings on a goat provided by the devil himself, who appeared as a man with eyes of fire. 840 children in a town with barely 3,000 residents. The math is staggering. That's 70 children per year, more than one each week, for 12 straight years in a small community where everyone knows each other. Any single missing child would have sparked immediate searches and town-wide alarm, yet no one noticed. And it gets even more absurd. Parish death records from Logroño over that same period show normal childhood mortality rates, roughly 12 to 15 deaths per year from illness or accident. There is no evidence of mass murder. The 840 murdered children María claimed to have killed simply did not exist. Yet the inquisitors recorded every word, accepted it as fact, and prepared to execute her based solely on that confession. Until one man asked a question no one else dared. Alonso de Salazar Frias, a younger inquisitor tasked with reviewing the Basque trials, read Maria's statement. Then he read dozens more. Women admitting to flying, to transforming into animals, to attending enormous gatherings of witches in remote places. On the same nights they were seen by their families at home. Salazar did something unthinkable for his time. He investigated. He traveled to the villages mentioned in confessions, checked baptism and burial records, spoke to entire communities, compared dates and locations, and what he uncovered destroyed the foundation of the Inquisition's torture-based system. Every confession extracted under torture contained impossibilities, geographic errors, contradictions in time, claims that broke the laws of nature. But here's the part history books rarely include. Salazar didn't free the prisoners. He couldn't. The machinery of the Inquisition wouldn't permit it. María de Zozoya died from infection 3 weeks after giving her confession, still imprisoned, never given a trial. But Salazar wrote a report, a meticulous, devastating critique of torture as a method of investigation. In 1612, he presented it to the Spanish Supreme Council and included this line: "There were neither witches nor those bewitched until they were spoken of and written about." In other words, torture doesn't uncover truth. It manufactures whatever truth the interrogator wants. Shockingly, the Supreme Council agreed. They issued new restrictions that sharply limited torture in witchcraft cases. Courts across Europe began citing Salazar's findings. The Judas Cradle's use diminished, slowly, grudgingly, but undeniably, over the following century. Maria's delusional confession, born from fever and torment atop a wooden pyramid, had revealed the system's fatal flaw. Torture doesn't produce evidence. It produces obedience. But the Judas Cradle did not vanish entirely, because 172 years later, in 1782, One woman's encounter with it became the turning point that finally ended its reign of terror, and her story is the one that lingers long after the history books close. Her name was Anna Goldie. She became the final legally executed witch in all of Europe, and the cradle was used one last time. I know this is dark. I know you might feel unsettled reading this. I felt the same while researching it. But if you're still here, you're clearly as drawn to history's brutal truths as I am. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week I'm uncovering an execution method so vicious, so horrifying, that it was banned after being used exactly once. And the reason it was banned, it's not all what you might expect. Let's focus on Anna Goldie, because her story represents the culmination of everything we've discussed. June 13th, 1782. Glarus, Switzerland. Anna Goldie is 48, a domestic servant working for a physician named Johann Jacob Scuddy. One morning, Scuddy's 8-year-old daughter begins convulsing and vomiting. She claims to have discovered needles in her milk. Scuddy immediately accuses Anna of witchcraft. She is arrested without delay. What makes this case remarkable is the context. It is 1782. The Enlightenment is in full swing. Voltaire has been dead for 4 years. The American Revolution has just concluded. Europe is supposedly entering an era of reason, science, and human rights. And yet, Anna Goldie is brought before a court, formally accused of devilry, and sentenced to torture to force a confession. The instrument? The Judas Cradle. Trial transcripts preserved in the Glarus archives show that Anna was subjected to cradle for approximately 18 hours across 2 separate sessions. The records use clinical, almost detached language. The accused was positioned on the device according to traditional procedure. After the second session, delirious from pain and infection, Anna confessed. She claimed to have made a pact with the devil, who appeared to her as a black dog with fiery eyes. She admitted to poisoning the child's milk with needles supposedly enchanted by demons. The court pronounced the death sentence. But then something unprecedented occurred. News of the trial spread far beyond the local region, across Europe. Newspapers in Germany, France, and England published reports condemning the proceedings. Enlightenment intellectuals, who had spent decades theorizing about human rights, were suddenly faced with a real-world example of their ideas being tested. The Swiss government in Bern received dozens of petitions demanding intervention. The Glarus court was flooded with letters from legal scholars reminding them that confessions obtained under torture had been discredited for decades. Yet the local judges refused to relent. They pressed forward with the execution. Anna Goldie's ordeal became the tipping point. Public outrage, intellectual scrutiny, and legal criticism combined in a way that no prior case had achieved. Her suffering on the Judas Cradle and the broader injustice surrounding her trial directly influenced the eventual banning of torture as a legal instrument in Switzerland and ultimately across Europe on June 13, 1782. Anna Goldie was executed by beheading in the public square. And finally, something gave way. The reaction was immediate and relentless. Within weeks, the Swiss Confederation launched an official investigation into the Glarus court. The judges responsible for Anna's sentence were formally reprimanded. But more importantly, the case became a symbol, a rallying point. Emperor Joseph of Austria, observing from Vienna, issued the 1787 Penal Code, which officially abolished torture throughout the Habsburg Empire. Other German states followed suit. France outlawed judicial torture in 1789. The chain reaction had begun. But here's the detail history often omits. The part that lingers. The Judas Cradle devices themselves were not destroyed. Many were preserved, and today you can see them in museums across Europe. The Medieval Crime Museum in Rothenburg, Germany, the Museum of Torture in Vienna, and in private collections scattered across the continent. The very pyramid thought to have been used on Anna Goldie is believed to reside in the Swiss National Museum, though rarely displayed. Curators argue it's too disturbing, too graphic. Yet it remains a stark, tangible reminder of what humanity can justify. Anna's execution, Europe's last legal torture for witchcraft, sparked reforms that ultimately shaped the Geneva Conventions of 1949, explicitly prohibiting torture under international law. Her suffering, senseless, brutal, and prolonged, became a historical marker, the moment Europe collectively said, Never again. From an instrument of torture to a catalyst for human rights. From a pyramid of agony to a symbol of remembrance and warning. To put this in perspective, over roughly 3 centuries, from the late 1400s to 1782, historians estimate that the Judas Cradle was used on at least 5,000 documented victims throughout Europe. The true number is almost certainly higher, as many Inquisition records were lost or never existed in smaller jurisdictions. 5,000 individuals endured days of unimaginable torment, all because of a geometric design, a calculated angle, and a bureaucracy that turned human suffering into procedure. And this is why it matters today. Why I spent weeks researching it, and why you've spent 20 minutes watching. The Judas Cradle wasn't the work of monsters. It was a creation of officials convinced they were protecting society, of religious authorities who believed they were saving souls, of engineers merely solving technical problems. That is the lesson. Torture doesn't require evil people. It only requires ordinary people convinced that extreme measures are justified and willing to act on that belief. That the ends justify the means, that the suffering of one person will somehow prevent greater harm. And when we forget that, when we let ourselves believe that enhanced interrogation, necessary measures, or any other euphemism makes cruelty acceptable, we are one step away from rebuilding the pyramid. The Geneva Conventions, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the international laws against torture that we take for granted today all trace their roots back to cases like María de Zozoya's impossible confession and Anna Goldie's senseless execution. The suffering of those victims bought us a promise, never again. Which brings me to a question I truly want your thoughts on. Should museums continue displaying these instruments of torture? On one side, they are powerful educational tools, tangible proof of what happens when society abandons human dignity. Seeing the real pyramid, the ropes, the devices in person makes history visceral in a way no textbook ever could. Standing before the Judas Cradle at the Medieval Crime Museum in Rothenburg, Germany, you are confronting the physical reality of human cruelty. But there is another side. Do we risk glorifying this horror, turning pain into spectacle? Some medieval torture museums operate as tourist attractions, complete with gift shops selling miniature replicas of the devices. That feels deeply wrong. Where is the line between preserving history and exploiting trauma, between education and entertainment? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. There's no simple answer, and I want to know what you think. And before you go, remember I promised a follow-up. I'm investigating an execution method so unthinkably cruel that after it was used once, every European nation immediately banned it. No debate, no gradual reform, one use, instant prohibition. What could possibly be worse than what you've just learned? You'll need to watch to find out. It involves an elephant, a condemned prisoner, and a single choice that haunted an entire empire. Thanks for watching. And seriously, go hug someone you love. After spending 20 minutes in this darkness, it's worth remembering what humanity can also be. We've explored centuries of agony, mechanical precision turned into torture, and the suffering of thousands. But alongside that horror, we've also traced the origins of protections and rights we hold today. María de Zozoya, Anna Goldie, and countless other victims remind us of both the extremes of cruelty and the enduring power of justice. Let their stories teach us vigilance, empathy, and the courage to never allow history to repeat itself.